They dumped the shells in the dark, not because anyone was hiding anything. There was nothing to hide. Just barges and crews, and hundreds of thousands of tons of oyster shells sliding off the back into the Gulf of Mexico, in an operation that, to anyone watching from the shore, would have looked less like environmental restoration and more like throwing away an incomprehensible quantity of trash. The shells came from seafood restaurants, from processing facilities, from the accumulated mountains of discarded oyster material that Florida's coastal communities had been producing for decades. Millions and millions of individual shells, each one the remnant of a living animal, piled into trucks and loaded onto barges and carried out to specific coordinates in the Gulf where crews dumped them overboard by the ton, watched them disappear beneath the surface and went back for more. It looked, on the surface, like the least promising environmental intervention imaginable. You could not have been blamed for watching that operation and thinking that nothing good could possibly come from dropping 500,000 tons of old restaurant shells into the ocean. You would have been spectacularly wrong. What formed on the seafloor beneath those coordinates in the years that followed the dumping is one of the most extraordinary examples of ecological recovery ever documented in American coastal waters. A reef, a living, growing, biologically diverse reef that has fundamentally transformed the ecosystem of a section of Florida's coastline, bringing back species that hadn't been seen in those waters in generations. Cleaning water that had been degraded for decades and demonstrating something profound about the resilience of marine ecosystems when they are given the one thing they most desperately need, the right foundation. This is the full story of what Florida dropped into the Gulf, what grew from it, and why it may be the most important thing any state has done for its coastal waters in the last 50 years. To understand why dumping oyster shells into the ocean works, why it works so extraordinarily well that scientists who have spent careers studying marine restoration describe the results with a kind of barely contained excitement, you need to understand what an oyster reef actually is, and what has happened to oyster reefs along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts of the United States over the past century and a half. Oyster reefs are not incidental features of coastal ecosystems. They are foundational infrastructure, the biological equivalent of the steel and concrete framework that holds a building up. They are built by living oysters, which cement themselves to hard substrate into each other, growing in dense three-dimensional clusters that create physical structure where otherwise there would be only flat, featureless seafloor. That structure is everything. It creates habitat complexity, crevices, overhangs, surfaces, chambers, that dozens of other species depend on for shelter, for feeding, for reproduction. It moderates water flow. It filters the water column with extraordinary efficiency. Each adult oyster capable of filtering up to 50 gallons of water per day, removing suspended particles, excess nutrients, and algae that would otherwise drive the water quality problems that plague coastal estuaries. And it creates the hard substrate that oyster larvae, called spat, need to settle and grow, meaning a healthy reef is self-reinforcing, continuously adding new material and new filtering capacity as generation after generation of oysters settles on the shells of their predecessors. At their historical peak, oyster reefs covered an estimated 180,000 square kilometers of shallow coastal seafloor around the world. They were among the dominant ecological features of estuaries from Maine to Texas, from the Pacific Northwest to the Gulf of Mexico. European explorers arriving in North America in the 16th and 17th centuries described oyster reefs so extensive and so dense that they posed navigation hazards. Scarper reefs breaking the surface at low tide, visible from approaching ships, marking the entrances to harbors and estuaries that would later become some of the most important ports in American history. New York Harbor's oyster population before European colonization has been estimated at approximately 220,000 acres of reef, filtering the entire volume of the harbor every few days. Chesapeake Bay's oyster population before commercial harvesting began could filter the entire volume of the bay in approximately 3 to 4 days. Florida's Gulf Coast, with its warm, shallow waters and nutrient-rich estuaries, supported reefs of similar density and ecological importance throughout its pre-colonial history. The destruction of those reefs is one of the most consequential ecological disasters in American history, and it happened through a combination of commercial overharvesting, habitat destruction, disease, and the accumulated water quality degradation that followed the loss of the filtering capacity the reefs had provided. Commercial oyster harvesting in the United States expanded dramatically in the 19th century, driven by urban demand from growing coastal cities, where oysters were an important, cheap protein source consumed by working-class populations in quantities that are almost incomprehensible by modern standards. New York City alone consumed approximately 1 million oysters per day at the peak of the oyster bar culture of the mid-19th century. The harvest pressure on reef populations was enormous and sustained, and unlike many fisheries where the harvested species can recover between seasons if the habitat remains intact, oyster harvesting directly removed the reef structure itself, The shells and the living animals built the reef, and taking them out meant not just removing the current generation of oysters, but dismantling the substrate that the next generation needed to settle on. By the early 20th century, oyster reefs across most of their historical range had been reduced to a fraction of their former extent. Disease accelerated the collapse. Two parasitic diseases, dermo and MSX, swept through oyster populations along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts in the mid-20th century, killing oysters faster than populations could recover. Water quality degradation, driven by the nutrient pollution from agricultural runoff, sewage, and coastal development that poured into estuaries as American coastal populations grew explosively in the 20th century, created conditions of low oxygen, hypoxia, that stressed surviving oyster populations and made reef recovery more difficult. And the loss of the reefs themselves accelerated the water quality problems in a feedback loop where fewer oysters meant more nutrient loading and algal growth, which meant lower oxygen, which meant fewer oysters. Today, Florida's oyster story has its own specific geography centered on Apalachicola Bay in the Panhandle region where the Apalachicola River meets the Gulf of Mexico. Apalachicola Bay was historically one of the most productive oyster fisheries in the United States. Its reefs supporting a commercial harvest that at its peak in the 1980s produced approximately 90% of Florida's oyster harvest and approximately 10% of the entire national supply. The bay's productivity was driven by the perfect combination of salinity, temperature, nutrient input from the river, and the extensive natural reef structure that had built up over centuries. The oyster industry was not just an economic activity in Apalachicola, it was the cultural and economic identity of the community, handed down through generations of oystering families who worked the same reefs their grandparents had worked. The collapse of Apalachicola Bay's oyster population in the early 2010s was catastrophic and rapid. A combination of factors converged simultaneously: reduced freshwater flow down the Apalachicola River, the result of upstream water consumption in Georgia that became the subject of a prolonged interstate water war, changed the salinity regime of the bay in ways that stressed oyster populations and favored predators and disease organisms. Years of drought reduced river flow further. Commercial harvesting continued even as the population declined. And then, in the aftermath of Hurricane Michael in 2018 and the cumulative effects of all these stressors, the oyster population collapsed. The commercial harvest fell to near zero. The oystering families who had worked the bay for generations lost their livelihoods. The reefs that had built up over centuries were essentially dead. The shells still present on the seafloor, but no longer supporting productive populations of living oysters. The restoration effort that followed the Apalachicola collapse and the parallel shell recycling and reef restoration programs that had been developing across Florida's Gulf Coast even before the collapse represented a convergence of ecological urgency, scientific understanding, and practical innovation that produced the results that are now astonishing the marine biology community. The core insight behind oyster shell recycling as a restoration tool is elegant in its simplicity. Oyster larvae need hard substrate to settle on. Specifically, they strongly prefer to settle on oyster shells rather than on other hard materials, apparently because the shell surface carries chemical cues that signal to the settling larvae that this is a suitable location. Fresh substrate, bare rock or concrete, works, but settlement rates on recycled oyster shell are substantially higher. The mountain of discarded shells accumulating at seafood restaurants and processing facilities across Florida's coastal communities represented an enormous supply of exactly the substrate that collapsed reefs desperately needed. Connecting the supply to the need was the foundation of the shell recycling programs that have been expanding across Florida for years. The logistics of shell recycling are more complex than they might initially appear. Shells collected from restaurants cannot simply be immediately redeployed. They need to cure, typically for 6 months to a year, to reduce the organic material still attached to them and to avoid water quality problems from the decomposition of that organic material when the shells are deployed underwater. Collection networks have been built that involve hundreds of participating restaurants across Florida's coastal communities: Tampa, Sarasota, Fort Myers, Pensacola, Panama City, each one setting aside their discarded shells for pickup by program volunteers or contractors. The cured shells are then stockpiled at staging areas, loaded onto barges, and taken to deployment sites selected based on water depth, current patterns, salinity regimes, and proximity to existing or historical reef structures. At the deployment sites, the shells are released overboard in quantities calculated to build substrate mounds of appropriate depth and structure to support reef development. The quantities involved in Florida's most ambitious reef restoration efforts are genuinely staggering. The term 500,000 tons, while it captures the scale of some of the most ambitious projects, actually represents the cumulative output of programs that have been running for years across multiple sites and multiple organizations: the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, the Nature Conservancy, various county Governments and numerous nonprofit organizations have all been contributing to shell recycling and reef restoration efforts at different scales and in different locations. The combined output of these programs has placed hundreds of thousands of tons of culch, the term for the substrate material used in oyster reef restoration, onto Florida's seafloor in locations chosen for their potential to support reef recovery. What happens after the shells hit the bottom is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable. In water with good quality and appropriate salinity, the settlement of oyster spat on freshly deployed shell substrate can begin within weeks of deployment. Larval oysters drifting in the water column encounter the shell surface, detect the chemical cues that signal suitable habitat, and cement themselves to the substrate. Under good conditions, settlement densities can be high enough that within a single growing season, the deployed shell mound is covered with juvenile oysters, beginning to build the three-dimensional reef structure that will accumulate over subsequent years. The reef that forms is not static. It grows. Each generation of oysters adds its shell to the structure when it dies, building the reef upward and outward. A shell mound deployed on a flat seafloor can, over 5 to 10 years, develop into a complex reef structure several feet high, with the surface complexity, the crevices, overhangs, and chambers that characterizes a mature reef and that supports the greatest biological diversity. The biological diversity that follows reef establishment has consistently exceeded the expectations of the scientists monitoring restoration sites. Fish surveys at established restoration reefs in Florida have documented species assemblages dramatically richer than those found on adjacent flat seafloor. Sheepshead, black drum, red drum, speckled trout, flounder, snook, and numerous other species of both ecological and recreational importance using the reef for shelter and foraging. Invertebrate communities are similarly diverse, with stone crabs, blue crabs, shrimp, and numerous other species colonizing the reef structure. Wading birds, herons, egrets, roseate spoonbills concentrate at restoration reefs to forage on the abundant small fish and invertebrates the reefs support. The ecological cascade from a successfully established oyster reef extends far beyond the oysters themselves, creating a hub of biological activity in waters that had previously supported relatively little life on their flat, featureless seafloor. The water quality impacts of established restoration reefs are among the most practically significant outcomes of the program, and they have been measured with enough rigor to demonstrate real effects at ecologically meaningful scales. Nutrient pollution, excess nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural runoff, septic systems, and stormwater that drives algal blooms, and the low oxygen conditions that stress marine life. Is filtered from the water column by oysters as they feed. An established oyster reef at good density can remove substantial quantities of nitrogen from the water column annually, reducing the nutrient loading that drives water quality problems in Florida's estuaries. The clarity of the water improves as suspended particles are filtered out. Seagrass beds, which require clear water for the light penetration that supports their photosynthesis, can recover in areas where reef restoration has improved water clarity. And seagrass recovery brings its own cascade of ecological benefits, providing habitat for juvenile fish and invertebrates, sequestering carbon, and stabilizing sediment. The restoration of oyster reefs is not an isolated intervention. It is the restoration of an ecological engine that drives improvement across the entire coastal ecosystem it inhabits. The Apalachicola Bay restoration effort that followed the oyster collapse has become one of the most closely watched and most intensively studied restoration projects in American coastal management. Following the collapse, Florida closed the bay to commercial oyster harvesting in 2020, a decision that was economically devastating for the oystering community in the short term, but that was scientifically essential to give the depleted population any chance of recovery. Shell recycling and culch deployment programs were scaled up dramatically in the bay, placing millions of bushels of oyster shell on the reef areas where the historical population had existed. Water quality monitoring, spat settlement monitoring, and population surveys were established to track the recovery in real time. The early results have been cautiously encouraging. Settlement of new oysters on deployed substrate has been documented, and juvenile oyster populations have been observed on restoration sites. The recovery of a reef system as extensively depleted as Apalachicola Bay will take years to decades, and it depends on factors including river flow management and the outcome of the ongoing water allocation dispute with Georgia that the state cannot fully control. But the biological potential for recovery is present, and the substrate to support that recovery is being put in place. The success of Florida's shell recycling and reef restoration programs has attracted attention from coastal managers across the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic seaboard who are confronting similar stories of oyster reef collapse in their own waters. The Nature Conservancy's Gulf of Mexico Reef Restoration Program has expanded to include Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, as well as Florida, deploying shells and other culch materials at dozens of sites across the region. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has integrated oyster reef restoration into its broader coastal habitat restoration portfolio, providing funding and technical support for restoration projects that meet scientific standards for site selection, substrate deployment, and monitoring. The shell recycling model, collecting discarded restaurant shells, curing them, and redeploying them as reef substrate, has been adopted by programs in Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and other Atlantic coast states where oyster reef decline has followed similar patterns to those seen in the Gulf. The economics of oyster reef restoration deserve attention because they make a powerful case for the investment that restoration requires. A fully functioning oyster reef provides what ecologists call ecosystem services, benefits to human communities that have real economic value even when they are not captured in market transactions. Water filtration services provided by oyster reefs reduce the costs that municipalities and water management agencies would otherwise bear for water treatment. When economists have attempted to quantify the total value of ecosystem services provided by oyster reefs, the numbers consistently justify restoration investment by substantial margins. Studies have estimated the annual value of ecosystem services from a single acre of restored oyster reef at thousands to tens of thousands of dollars, values that dwarf the cost of deploying the shell substrate that initiated reef formation. The people who have been most directly affected by the reef restoration programs in Florida are the coastal communities, whose economic and cultural lives are bound up with the health of the adjacent waters. Commercial fishermen who had watched their catches decline for years as reef habitat disappeared have seen improvements in fish populations at restoration sites that have translated into better fishing. Recreational anglers whose pursuit of redfish and speckled trout was becoming increasingly difficult in degraded coastal waters have found new hotspots at restoration reefs. Ecotourism operators offering kayaking, birdwatching, and nature tours have developed programs that showcase restoration reefs as destinations that combine ecological education with genuine natural spectacle. The site of a thriving reef community in waters that had previously been ecologically impoverished is striking enough to attract visitors. And the oystering families of Apalachicola and other Florida communities who lost livelihoods in the collapse are watching the restoration progress with the specific hope of people who know exactly what a healthy reef looks like and who recognize the early signs that something alive and productive is returning to waters they have worked for generations. The lesson that Florida's oyster shell program is teaching the world of marine restoration is deceptively simple and enormously important. Ecological recovery at meaningful scales is possible when the right conditions are created. The marine ecosystem is not permanently damaged by even severe degradation. The biological potential for recovery persists, waiting for the substrate, the water quality, the reduced harvesting pressure, and the time that recovery requires. The oysters that have settled on deployed shells in Florida's restoration sites did not need to be transplanted or bred in laboratories. They were there all along, drifting as larvae in the water column, searching for the hard substrate they needed to become the next generation of reef builders. What they needed was what the shell barges provided, a foundation. 45 tons of cured shell placed at the right depth, in the right salinity, in water with the right current patterns, and within range of a surviving oyster population with larvae to contribute, can initiate a process of reef formation that proceeds largely on its own from that point forward, driven by the same biological processes that built the reefs before human activity dismantled them. The barges are still going out, the restaurants are still setting aside their shells, the volunteers are still collecting and curing and staging the material that will become next year's reef substrate. And on the seafloor, beneath the coordinates where those shells have already been deployed, reefs that did not exist a decade ago are growing, filtering the water, sheltering the fish, building the three-dimensional structure that dozens of species are learning, generation by generation, to call home. What Florida dumped into the Gulf of Mexico looked like nothing. It became something extraordinary. The process that turned 500,000 tons of restaurant shells into a living, growing, biologically thriving reef is the same process that is waiting to happen in every coastal water, where the right foundation is given the chance to do what nature, given the opportunity, has always known how to do. The shells went in, the reef came up, and the Gulf of Mexico, in the places where that trade has been made, is more alive today than it has been in a very long time.